Political situation in Punjab. Date 1974, June 17, 11:46, Monday. Electronic telegrams from Pakistan, Lahore, to Department of State, Secretary of State. Start message. Jamaat-e-Islami leader Mian Tufail Muhammad reportedly sent telegram to Saudi Arabia over weekend requesting King Faisal's intervention to help solve sectarian question. In telegram, Muhammad reportedly reminded monarch that issues should be viewed in light of decisions taken during Rabita-e-Alam-e-Islami conference held last April in Jeddah. According to local source, conference decided to condemn Ahmadis as agents of Israel and international Zionism, and to declare Ahmadis as non-Muslims throughout Islamic world. On June 15th, Layalpur chapter of JUI held emergency meeting and passed resolution calling upon King Faisal, Colonel Gaddafi of Libya, and President Sadat of Egypt to put pressure on Bhutto to declare Ahmadis minority in Pakistan. End message.
Bhutto Sahib only wanted to win the favor of the religious parties. That's all. He was not interested what was the opinion of the people, because religious parties were against Ahmadis, and he wanted to win their favor. So that's all. He accepted their pressure, just for his own personal interest and for the interest of his party.
Then why this amendment? I have been told by some informed people that it was under the pressure of Saudi Arab. They asked Bhutto, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, that we don't want Ahmadis to come to Hajj purposes. You stop them.
Shah Faisal had money, and Shah Faisal could give Pakistan a few votes of the conservative Arab countries in its bid for have a bigger role at the international level. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that the people of Pakistan, they by their school of thought, are more inclined, towards the Arabs than towards the Iranians, and therefore, they look to have good relations with the Arab countries. And there is a myth that the Saudis are the keepers of Mecca and Medina and servants of the holy places. So the public in Pakistan has an emotional attachment to them, and these things have been exploited very well by the Saudis.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the third episode in the series 1974, Democracy to Extremism. In the previous episode, we analysed the background of the extremist ideology which was going to end up in the statute book. After the formation of the state of Pakistan, there were anti-Ahmadi riots in 1953, but the justice prevailed. Hardliners were snubbed. It was Justice Munir's Judicial Inquiry report that predicted that the baby of extremism was living and waiting to be adopted. But certainly no government was ready to accept the menace, at least overtly, until 1973, when the Assembly of State of Kashmir on the Pakistan side passed a resolution to declare Ahmadis as non-Muslims. In 1974 then, the Parliament of Pakistan declared Ahmadis non-Muslim for the purpose of law and constitution. The period between the birth of Pakistan, there was 1947, 26 years after, up to 1973, that indicated an era of non-interference with religious matters by the state. However, the extent of the political importance of religion at that stage was undetermined. Seizing this uncertainty as an opportunity, the hardliners who had once opposed the creation of Pakistan, now ironically, they began to exert pressure upon the Pakistan government to establish a theocratic state. Well, they opposed at the first place the creation of Pakistan because they knew that the vision of a new state was anything but certainly not of a theocratic state.
था। आपको ये भी याद होगा कि जिन्ना साहब ने इस मुल्क का नाम रिपब्लिक ऑफ पाकिस्तान रखा था। इस्लामी वो भी जानते थे इस्लामी का मतलब क्या है। और मैं समझता हूँ किसी शख्स को ये हक़ नहीं है कि बानी पाकिस्तान ने जो नाम रखा था उसे तब्दील करे, लेकिन इन्होंने तब्दील किया।
This has been the dream of mullah, that they be given authority over takfir. Takfir is when you can declare somebody an infidel and a non-Muslim. Infidel is a term which should be alien and unknown in a modern nation state. There is no such thing as an infidel or a Muslim or a non-Muslim. People are either citizens or they are not. And when we say that such and such a community is non-Muslim, we are by implication accepting, endorsing the impression that there is discrimination. If I want you to be excommunicated, that means there are certain disadvantages if you are thrown out of that particular community. And if I stay inside, I'm going to take lion's share in decision making, in economic, social and political leverage, influence. When we declare somebody's faith as being different from somebody else, we are excommunicating, we are excluding a certain community, we are actually announcing that there is going to be discrimination in our state. Otherwise, why should it benefit any community, whether somebody is declared a Muslim or a non-Muslim? So mullah took that as a test case.
As in the previous shows, we have been joined by Mr. Mujibur Rahman, who is an advocate of Supreme Court of Pakistan and is a senior member of the Bar. Assalamu alaikum, Mujib Sahib.
Wa alaikum assalam.
First of all, my question is, of course, we discussed in the previous show 1953 riots and then 54 Justice Munir inquiry report. Now, moving on by 21 years. In this period, why the Maulvis or the hardliners had to wait for 21 years and then come up with the idea of another set of riots against the Ahmadis and then subsequently Parliament sitting to decide on people's faith?
That's a very good question, Farooq. What is in your mind is actually that what is the importance of 1974 after a quiet period of about 21 years. After 1953 inquiries, there were findings of the court, and the intelligentsia and everybody, every person, every educated person in Pakistan knew the background of the riots, and therefore there was no scope for the issue to be taken up again. So it was all quiet. There were no disturbances, and one never heard of the demand again. Why, after 21 years in 1974, the issue was taken up? Issue was taken up in 1974, no doubt, but why the time was opportune for the powers that be is a different question. In the events that we see in 1974, because they wanted to stage a drama on the political scene of Pakistan, an agitation, a riot was maneuvered on an incident which happened in Rabwa railway station. Right. Some students of National Medical College passed through Rabwa, and they created disturbance, and there were a fight between two student groups at Rabwa. So that was made an excuse, but that was not the real reason. Right. That was an engineered incident.
Let's see what Professor Tayyib Mahmood, an independent researcher on the subject, had to say about the topic under discussion.
Fantastic timing. I'm not suggesting that, so all the parties sat down there and thought, we should have the Rabwa incident. But I am suggesting that things happen, but it takes two to tango. That if the Rabwa incident had happened 5 years before or 10 years before, one might not even have read it in the newspaper. But the timing was very interesting, that a minor incident happens, and again, by my lights, and Samdani Saab's report is very clear on that, and anybody who knows anything about Justice Samdani knows that perhaps there never has been anybody of more integrity in the history of Pakistan. I, by the way, have had my personal pleasure of working with him together in the law firm, and it's clear, a train has gone there. There are students from Islami Jamiyat Talaba there, primarily from Nishtar Medical College, but perhaps some others too. So it's very clear that they did sort of, which is again totally plausible and understandable, that they are passing through Rabwa train station. These are Islami Jamiyat Talaba student. So what are they going to do at a Rabwa station? Praise the Ahmadis? Be polite, be respectful, given what their ideological trainings are. So it stands to reason that they, maybe didn't know that how it may flare up. So I'm not suggesting some conspiracy theory here, but I am suggesting as to what is the plausible unfolding of events and the credibility of Samdani Saab's judgment. That they messed with it, and of course, so if somebody is being abusive to your religion or to your religious leaders, what are you going to do? That again is very understandable, that people will react. And if it get, and hot heads can react quite a bit, and some scuffles do take place, and again, as Samdani Saab says, relatively minor stuff.
Why it was in 74, there can be many reasons. People have tried to speculate why it happened so. But now over a period of time, the things are crystallizing and now we know really why it happened. But those details are yet to come. Some people think that Bhutto had no reason to do this because he had defeated the fundamentalist lobby in 1970 election thoroughly. He had wiped them out. They had no existence. And he was a very strong and popular leader. He was the only leader in West Pakistan, which is now Pakistan. So therefore, and he had defeated the religious lobby. He had no reason to be cowed down by them or to be influenced or pressurized by them. But there is also a view that in 1971, with the fall of Dhaka, yes, a blame was attached to Bhutto's career. Right. He was blamed for having worked the breakdown of Pakistan by his acts of omission and commission, whatever they may have been. We are not going into that. So he felt weak on that account also. The other view is that it was not Bhutto's weakness only. There was some sort of international outside influences working on it in the special particular circumstances in which Pakistan was placed at that time, the economic predicament and the political predicament. It necessitated some kind of foreign influence which Bhutto readily accepted. So there is a kind of a conspiracy theory. I'm not going into that. But then the third theory, which I would most probably adhere to, and of course the conspiracy theory now over a period of time, there is credible information available why these things happened. But I personally feel that it was the ambition of Bhutto which knew no bounds. It was the ambition of Bhutto and ambition of King Faisal which coincided. Which we'll discuss. Which we discussed. We have also mentioned about it earlier. The ambitions of the two gentlemen coincided, and there was certain foreign elements that came in.
Now we take the views of a keen researcher and an author of history, Dr. Mrs. Sultan Ahmed from Pakistan, who shared with us his thoughts in the last show as well. Dr. Ahmed, King Faisal gained much prominence in the Islamic world in early 1970s. How was it linked to the movements against Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya?
In early 70s, international market saw the hike of petrol prices, and that added to the good fortunes of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and with it, with better financial position, their ambitions also were raised. And obviously, the first aim was to get the leadership of the Islamic world. As the custodians of the holy places, they had a special special place among the governments of the Islamic world. How did it affect movement against Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya? The two incidents make it very clear. Number one was Islamic Summit Conference that was arranged in Lahore in 1974, in February 1974. Of course, Mr. Bhutto was the chairman of the Islamic Summit Conference, and but in addition to that, King Faisal, Shah Faisal was the co-chairman, and he was sponsoring this conference, which was a very important event for Pakistan financially. Before the start of this conference, Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya received news that this occasion will be used to incite hatred against Ahmadis among the delegates of the different countries. And in addition to that, before the conference started and even after that and during those days, there were some journals who didn't enjoy much publication, but they were at least very active in proposing that Shah Faisal should be made the leader of the Islamic world. He should be elected as a leader of the Islamic world and others should follow him. And according to those news that were being published in those journals like Chatan and Al-Member, Idi Amin, the General Idi Amin, President of Uganda, was actually making this proposal. But actually, though in the beginning Mr. Bhutto and Aziz Ahmad, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, denied that this occasion will be used to incite hatred against Ahmadis among the delegates, but ultimately what happened was that literature against Ahmadis were distributed among the delegates of the countries. Then another important event, just after this Islamic Summit Conference, where Saudi influence was very conspicuous, was a meeting of Rabita Alam-e-Islami World Muslim League that was called in Makkah in just 1.5 months after the Islamic Summit Conference. In that meeting of World Muslim League, in a subcommittee meeting, which was presided by a Saudi delegate, a lawyer with the name of Mr. Mujahid al-Sawaf. And this subcommittee was dealing with Freemasonry, Baha'ism, and Qadianism. These were the issues that were being presented in that subcommittee. In that subcommittee, the proposal was passed that Ahmadis should be declared non-Muslim, they should be socially and economically boycotted, and their activities should be checked by all the Muslim governments of the world, and no Muslim should marry them, and so on and so forth. So this was very clear in those days that Saudi influence is working in propagating, supporting this movement against Ahmadis in the early part of 1974. And then on May 1974, we saw the riots erupted in Pakistan.
Okay, so Mr. Bhutto was not known for his religious zeal, Mr. Ahmed. So how was it that he agreed to play a part in this plan?
Well, that was exactly the reason that he agreed to this plan. But it was not politically very feasible for him to have this label on him, that he was not exactly known for his religious inclination. Rather, he was known to be almost of atheist type of politician with very prominent leftist inclination. So Mr. Bhutto thought that if he agrees to this plan and he participates in this plan, he can present himself as a hero of Islam who has declared Qadianis as a non-Muslim.
Well, earlier we spoke with the founding member of Bhutto's Pakistan People's Party. His name is Dr. Mubashir Hassan. Alongside being a founding member of the Bhutto's Pakistan People's Party, he was also a senior minister in Bhutto's government, a man with some important insight. Let's listen to Dr. Mubashir Hassan, what he had to say about this.
Mr. Bhutto had a great desire to be the leader of Islamic world. Another man who wanted to be the leader, and he was a friend of Mr. Bhutto, was King Faisal. King Faisal's ardent desire was to be a leader of Islam. It was within his power that practice of not allowing non-Muslims to perform Hajj should apply to Ahmadis also. Now, how to tell who is Ahmadi and who is not Ahmadi? The only way was to write on the passport of Pakistani Muslims that they are not Ahmadis. it was for this purpose that that amendment was made.
To further bolster the political status, Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto began to satisfy the religious orthodoxy by reintroducing the relevance of religion in public policy. We've been talking about this in the last few minutes. Within this context, in order to spur the government to act in their favour, in 1974 the hardliners, the mullahs that is, initiated a second wave of anti-Ahmadiyya riots after 53 and now in 74, where again Ahmadis were the victims of horrible acts of violence and murder. Now we go back again to Dr. Ahmed and explore the background and significance of this second wave of anti-Ahmadiyya riots. Dr. Ahmed, did 1974 riots erupt spontaneously, or was it a planned event?
Two factors we cannot ignore. Just look at the sequence of events. We have talked about that in 1973, when the new constitution of Pakistan declared, in the schedule where the prescribed oaths for the Prime Minister and President were written, the belief of Khatm-e-Nabuwat was introduced, that oath for the President and Prime Minister. Just 2 weeks after that, Kashmir Assembly moved resolution against Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya. And after that, in the beginning of 1974, then we talked about that how in February 1974, in Islamic Summit Conference in Lahore, literature against Ahmadis was distributed among the delegates of different Muslim countries. Then within 1.5 months, Rabta Alim-Islami World Muslim League passed resolution that Ahmadis, Qadianis should be declared non-Muslim, and they should be politically and socially and economically boycotted. Their activities should be checked, so on and so forth. So this sequence of events make it very clear that this was not a spontaneous eruption of riots in May 1974. It was a well-planned, well-thought-of plan which started in 1973 and culminated in the riots in May 1974. Second important factor I'll talk about is that in May 1973, head of Ahmadiyya community, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis, Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad, called an emergency Majlis-e-Shura. Ordinarily, the routine Majlis-e-Shura of Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya is usually scheduled in March of every year. And that has already occurred. But emergency Majlis-e-Shura was called, and in that, head of Ahmadiyya community told the delegates of the Jamaat that a conspiracy is being prepared against Ahmadis, which has got 3 basic constituents. Number 1, that they'll try to assassinate head of Ahmadiyya community, Imam Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya, and many of Ahmadis. Number 2, they will pressurize Ahmadis economically, socially, and economically, and will push them to the corner to that extent that they may give up their beliefs. And third plan was that he told Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya, the elected members of that Majlis-e-Shura, that third plan was that the opponents of Jamaat will try to split Jamaat into 2 factions. So when we consider this whole picture and we take the sequence of events into account, it's very clear that this was not a spontaneous event. This was not an accident. This was well planned beforehand.
Right, Mr. Rahman and Dr. Tayyib Mahmood have already mentioned the Rabwa railway station incident on 29th May 74. Was it really the incident that triggered the riots against Ahmadis?
Well, in May 1974, students of Nishtar Medical College, Multan, were planning for a trip to hilly areas of Swat and adjacent areas. They requested for special compartments, bogies in the railway, and they were initially asking for a reservation in some other train, but the railway authorities allotted them Chenab Express, which was passing through Rabwa, which usually at that time passed through Rabwa. So what happened that the first time they passed through Rabwa was on 22nd of May 1974. And some of these students, they tried to incite the people who were present at the railway station, people of Rabwa. They raised slogan against Ahmadiyya, and they threw some stones, and they misbehaved in many different ways. But nothing serious occurred at that time. And rather, after in a Friday sermon after that, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis, head of Ahmadi community, told Jamaat that they should be patient. They shouldn't fall in such a trap when they will be incited to retaliate, and that can be used against them. But sadly, on 29th of May 1974, when that train was coming back from Rawalpindi, it was passing through Rabwa, the same group of students, they got out of their compartments and raised, before the train arrived, actually many people had gathered, many youngsters of Rabwa, 100 or 200 of them, had gathered and, at that railway station. Of course, it was wrong. It was against the teachings of Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya. But they had gathered to teach them a lesson, and a fight broke out between these youngsters belonging to Rabwa and the students of Nishtar Medical College, Multan. And just to quote the medical report that ultimately came in front of Samdani Tribunal, though fight was carried on for 2 hours or so, but none of the students of Nishtar Medical College, Multan received grievous injury, no fracture occurred. Only 2 students needed X-ray. They also turned out to be normal. But as it was planned beforehand, and this mistake of these youngsters of Rabwa provided the opportunity, immediately news was spread throughout Pakistan that Qadianis have cut the tongues or taken out the eyes or cut the ears of many of the students, and some of the students are about to die, and so on and so forth. And merely the rumors were enough to throw fire, to ignite the fire against Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya, and within hours the riots erupted in Pakistan.
Right, so obviously the railway station incident was only used as an excuse. So Dr. Ahmed, we have talked about Justice Munir inquiry report as well after the previous riots of 53, and after the Rabwa incident we hear also about something called Samdani Tribunal report. What was Samdani Tribunal and what was Samdani's report?
Well, when that the incident on the Rabwa railway station occurred on 29th of May 1974. Immediately riots erupted in Pakistan, and demands were made by the opposition in the National Assembly that government should investigate the matter. So a tribunal, which consisted of a single judge, Mr. Samdani, he was a High Court judge in Lahore High Court, was constituted, and that called the witnesses and asked many questions and compiled a report about the Rabwa incident that occurred on the Rabwa railway station on the 29th of May. But there's one major difference we should keep in mind, and that is, in 1953, when inquiry occurred, that commission consisted of Justice Munir and Justice Kiani. That inquiry, the purpose of the commission was to inquire about whole of the riots of 1953. But in this particular tribunal that was formulated in 1974, they were given the task, their task was confined just to the railway station incident that occurred in Rabwa. And though at that time many Ahmadis were being killed on the streets, their houses were being burned, their shops were being looted, their factories and were being burned, and they were being boycotted. But this was not within the task that was allotted to this tribunal, that they should inquire about it. Their job was just to inquire about the incident of the Rabwa railway station.
So was the Samdani report then made public at all?
Well, on 20th August 1974, Mr. Samdani submitted the report to the Chief Minister of Punjab, who was Mr. Hanif Rame at that time. And Mr. Rame praised the efforts and the hard work of Mr. Samdani. And on 23rd August, but before that, on date of 20th August 1974 is important because on that day, the questioning to Jamaat's delegation, the Special Committee of the National Assembly resumed after an interval. They started the proceedings, rather questioning to the Jamaat's delegation on 5th August. Cross-examination was started on 5th August. Then on 10th, they called for an interval. And then on 20th August was the day when the proceedings restarted. And on the same day, Mr. Samdani submitted the report to the Chief Minister of Punjab. On 23rd August 1974, Chief Minister of Punjab, Mr. Rame, handed over this report, officially at least, to Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And he gave statement that Prime Minister has assured that their government will act upon the recommendations of Mr. Samdani. Now, very strange thing, before that, what was happening, everybody was demanding that a railway incident that took place on the Rabwa railway station, inquiry should be conducted into that incident. And, but during the proceedings of Samdani Tribunal, Mr. Samdani issued a statement that these news are wrong and they're just rumors, that any of the boy was grievously hurt. The Nishtar Medical College boys and or the Rabwa boys had taken out their eyes or cut their tongue or cut their ears, whatever. This statement was issued that these rumors were wrong. But once it was known that now Mr. Samdani has submitted the report, so there was no demand from public or politicians or the opponents of the Jamaat that this report should be made public. Nobody made this demand, and that report has not been published till now. What was in that report, I cannot comment because it was not made public. We cannot debate on that report. But when Mr. Samdani later on, many years later, wrote his autobiography, he did mention this factor that once this report was submitted, it should have been made public so that facts are made clear. And he was also expressed his surprise at the fact that nobody demanded that this report should be made public. So that was the end of Mr. Samdani's report.
Thank you very much. So a very bizarre response, of course, or I should say lack of response by the public and the government to this Samdani report, and it was not published. Very, very strange indeed. Mr. Rahman, now, what was the role of the press in fueling the flames of hatred against the Ahmadi community in those days?
Farooq, if you have to understand the Pakistani press, you will see that Pakistani press has a vernacular press and the English press, which usually caters for the international readership, and the vernacular press caters for the local readership.
Right.
In the vernacular press, we have different shades of opinion. But all the newspapers, every newspaper, I accuse all of them, they contributed to the killing of Ahmadis during that period by acts of omission or commission. Those who did not say anything inflammatory against Ahmadis, they kept quiet over certain things which they should have disclosed.
And now moving on to the actual parliamentary proceedings of the National Assembly of Pakistan. Now was a time in 1974 when the parliament was going to decide about one's faith.
ये तो बड़े अरसे से इस चीज़ की सारी तैयारी कर रहे थे, कोई वो बुनियाद नहीं कि यानी ये तो नहीं हो सकता कि अगर रेलवे स्टेशन पर अगर कुछ हो जाए तो उसके नतीजे में एक पूरी कम्युनिटी को उठाकर आप तहत कर दें, तो बड़ी जाती की बात है। लेकिन उससे पहले ये सारा ये कुक हो रहा था बहुत अरसे से, हम महसूस कर रहे थे कि ये सब कुछ हो रहा है, तैयारी हो रही है, और लेकिन ये होना था सब कुछ।
Yes, I definitely believe that whatever happened at Rabwa railway station, even so, that was prompted by majority community. Their members, medical students were passing to Rabwa railway station, and they initiated it, and on their return, they were paid back probably in the same coin. So there was nobody was gravely injured. There was no casualties, nothing of the kind. It was just that somebody wanted to take advantage of that. And somebody, when I say somebody, that means the government of the day, because they had a certain plan to go ahead with it. There are a number of justifications for that, for which we do not have solid evidence. But to me, it is very clear that what happened at Rabwa railway station on 2 occasions in 1 week definitely could not have triggered off such a grave outcome.
Right. Before delving into these unique proceedings in the modern history, let us first introduce ourselves with the delegation of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community to the Parliament.
In 1974, the Ahmadiyya delegation was led by the third successor of the promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad. He was born on the 16th of November 1909. He achieved his master's degree from Balliol College at the University of Oxford. During the anti-Ahmadiyya riots in 1953, he was imprisoned briefly. His quote, "Love for all, hatred for none," has become the motto of the community. Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad was the youngest member of the delegation. He later went on to become the fourth successor of the promised Messiah alayhi salam. Dost Muhammad Shahid was a high-ranking scholar and leading historian of the community. Maulana Abulata Jalandhari was an eminent scholar, debater, journalist, and veteran missionary of the community. Sheikh Muhammad Ahmad Mazhar was born in 1896. He was a renowned philologist, a competent lawyer, and an ardent scholar.
Now, with regards to these exceptional, I must say, exceptional proceedings, let us look at some of the characters of this drama.
Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the former Prime Minister and President of Pakistan and the founder of the Pakistan People's Party. Bhutto was also the first democratically elected leader to introduce the culture of using religion for political gains in Pakistan. Yahya Bakhtiar was the Attorney General under Bhutto, who conducted the questioning in the National Assembly in 1974. Mufti Mahmud was a powerful cleric, veteran member of the Indian National Congress, and the founding member of the Jamiat Ulema Islam. Earlier, he opposed the idea of partition of India. He was the man who was against the creation of the state of Pakistan.
Right, Mr. Rahman, we've seen Prime Minister Bhutto, of course, he was Prime Minister and must also have been the leader of the House. So one would expect him to be in such important proceedings present throughout, was he?
Not necessarily, because if he wanted to be a fair Prime Minister and if he wanted a fair proceedings, it was expected of him to be there, but technically it was not necessary,
right,
because the Assembly or the Special Committee had to take a decision. His presence would have been better. He did not. He was an ambitious person, and one characteristic of his character was that he had brinkmanship in his character. He would build up a situation and find an answer. He thought he would get away with everything. Mufti Mahmud was a genuine religious scholar in the traditional sense, but then he was one person who publicly in the press said as late as 1973 that thank God we did not join the sin of creating Pakistan. The exact words were, "Khuda ka shukr hai, hum Pakistan banane ke gunah mein shamil nahi the."
And he was the leader of opposition
at
that time.
He was the leader of the opposition. And Yahya Bakhtiar was a barrister.
He was the Attorney General.
Attorney General. He was a barrister, but he was not a lawyer of great eminence in his own right.
Right.
He became Attorney General because he was very friendly with Bhutto, and he conducted himself as an Attorney General very well. He was not altogether bad, but in his own right, he was not a very prominent lawyer.
Right.
So, but his conduct in the proceedings is something that we shall see during the proceedings.
Right, right. Interesting. A lot to look forward to, Mr. Rahman. So let us now look at some of the key dates of relevance.
Rabwa Railway Station Incident, 29th of May. The government tables a motion and opposition tables a resolution, 30th of June. Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad reads Mahzarnama, the memorandum, before the House on the 22nd and 23rd of July. In-camera proceedings start on the 5th of August. Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad is cross-examined for 11 days between the 5th and the 24th of August. Concluding speeches by various members of the Parliament, including the Attorney General, from the 29th of August to the 6th of September. resolution is passed and Ahmadis are declared non-Muslims for the purposes of law and constitution, 7th of September.
Right, Mr. Rahman, we understand there was a motion, first of all, tabled by the government, and then the opposition tabled a resolution. So what was the difference between the two?
You see, the motion that was tabled by the government, it was apparently, it appeared to be a neutral motion. They wanted to give an impression. It was a camouflage. The purpose of both the motion and the resolution were the same, but the resolution was more crude. The motion was a camouflage. The motion only said, the motion before the House was to discuss the question of the status in Islam of the persons who do not believe in the finality of the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him. That's it. Okay. Whereas the resolution was the longest resolution, and it took everything for granted. Right. It did not want any discussion. Right. The motion said discuss and decide. Right. It did not. It took everything for granted, and it started by saying, whereas, let me read that. It's a long one, I will not read the entire. Whereas it is fully established fact that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani claimed to be a prophet of the last prophet himself, and whereas, and whereas, and whereas, and whereas, and then I say, whereas the conference of the World Muslim Organization held in the city of Makkah on the 6th and 10th April of 1974, as they said. So they were banking on the resolution of
Muslim
the
World League.
Muslim World League.
Right,
and then
right.
ultimately said, now therefore this assembly should proceed to declare the Ahmadiyya. No discussion. We have said whatever I wanted to say, that take it for granted and pass. That was the difference between.
Very bizarre, actually. So how was the response given to this motion and resolution by the community?
You see, when this resolution and the motion was placed before the House, and it went into public, and the Jamaat was required to give a written memorandum or explain their position. So Jamaat submitted a written memorandum which is known as Mahzarnama. It is the longest document. I had the honor and privilege to have carried that document to the National Assembly and delivered it to the Secretary of the National Assembly. So that the memorandum was the response of the Jamaat, and Jamaat addressed both the resolution as well as the motion.
Right. Also, for the understanding, what does motion mean anyway, in legal terms?
Motion is a motion by the government placed before the assembly, which is either to be accepted or rejected after discussion. Resolution is not a binding thing. Resolution is a resolution usually placed by the opposition member, but sometimes even by the government. Resolutions are not binding things. Motions take a formal shape in the shape of a bill ultimately. Right. Resolutions may not.
Right, okay. Unfortunately, again, time has always been against us. Whenever we look at the mighty people, such as the Pharaoh or Nimrod or the Pharisees or the chiefs of the Quraysh, the first thought that comes to one's mind is that sooner or later, these weak, powerless, and poor prophets and their followers would perish. However, when we take a glance at history, we're astonished that these same weak and helpless people who stand under the banner of truth, peace, and harmony, ultimately triumph, and the governments and the mobs and tribes who oppose them disappear. Their evil ultimately succumbs to the will of God. History repeats itself, and the lessons remain unchanged.
In the next episode, we'll begin examining the actual in-camera proceedings of the National Assembly of Pakistan in 1974. We'll do that in light of the published proceedings that lifted the veil of secrecy after almost 4 decades.
देखना मर्द हक